so I sold my soul to the devil.
Rich people always have the craziest lawsuits, it seems. Today we're going to talk about two really prominent real estate lawsuits. They both involved Katy Perry. I'll unpack some of the details. And then I'm going to talk about Colorado real estate contracts and how those would apply in these circumstances. And hopefully, if we're lucky, we'll learn something. Now, the second story is really bonkers. You'll want to stick around for that one. I promise you'll be glad you did. But a question I get all the time is, if someone's under contract on a home, what happens if they change their mind? Can they get sued? In Colorado, that depends on if you're the buyer or the seller. A buyer can change their mind. There may or may not be consequences to that. But a seller, once you enter a contract, you can't change your mind. Now, before I get too far into this, I do want to say I've done real estate in Colorado for, 20 years or so. But I'm not an attorney. Like, this isn't legal advice. I'm not trying to tell anybody how real estate law works. If you need an attorney, I know some. But I'm just a guy on YouTube talking about Katy Perry. So if we all agree, let's just move forward and I'll tell you a couple of stories. What happens if a seller wants to change their mind after they've signed a contract? This first story is about a mansion in Montecito, California that Katy Perry had agreed to buy from a guy named Carl Westcott, who was the founder of 1-800-Flowers. Shortly after agreeing to sell the house, Westcott, the owner, changed his mind. He said, I don't want to sell the house anymore. I'd like to stay in it for the rest of my life. He claimed to have just had surgery. He was on opiates, said he had a brain disorder, and really he just wasn't cognitively aware enough to be able to sign a contract, and he wanted to pull out. Katy Perry was buying this house with her man Orlando Bloom, and they both said they loved the house and they still wanted to buy it. So they ended up suing Westcott to force the sale. Last month, the judge ultimately ruled that no doctor had diagnosed the seller with any kind of mental deficiencies. He knew what he was doing when he signed the contract. The judge found that Westcott had been wheeling and dealing the whole time, working with his broker, negotiating other properties, talking about commissions, and the sale was ordered to proceed. Now, next month, there's a hearing regarding damages. And the celebrity couple is asking for almost $6 million. They're asking for legal fees, and they're also saying they had to rent a place while they were waiting to close on this one, which may or may not be true, but they're asking for $6 million. The craziest part of this story to me is that the seller stood to make almost $4 million on this place, and he had just bought it 2 months before. So he stole the house, and he was looking to wheel and deal and sell it to somebody else, make his money. And my guess is, kind of seems like what I saw, he maybe had a different buyer lined up, and he wanted to make a little bit more money on it. So if you're enjoying this story, please give this video a like. It lets YouTube know to share it with other people. Maybe consider subscribing. I'd love it if you did that. And hopefully you'd love it too. If you like real estate like me, you'll enjoy this channel. Here's how this story applies to the rest of us, right? The people who are living day to day, don't have an army of attorneys working for us, and aren't buying $15 million mansions in LA. If you've signed an agreement to sell your house with your agent, you're just agreeing to put it on the market and you change your mind for whatever reason, that's between you and the agent. And usually you can get out of that agreement. Sometimes you can't. It really depends on the situation. I always give my people the option to cancel their contract at any time. It's just a nice way to do business. I don't want somebody to feel like they have to work with me. However, if someone decides they don't want to sell their home once they've gone under contract with the buyer, they really are opening themselves up to a lot of lawsuit possibilities. The buyer can ask for damages. They can ask for legal fees, and they'll probably get them. This is called specific performance. And that means that the buyer can force the seller to go through with the sale. And if it goes down that way and the buyer wins, the seller will be ordered to pay damages and legal fees. And those are going to be significant, just like they were in the Katy Perry case. Sometimes sellers have a really legitimate reason for not wanting to sell. I had a guy who went under contract. It was a full price offer. He was really happy. He had a verbal offer on a job in Ohio, but he didn't have it in writing yet. Before he accepted the offer, I told him, you don't have to accept this offer, but if you do, you're going to be forced to sell it if that job offer doesn't come through. And he signed it anyway. But when that job offer never came, he decided he wanted to pull out of the contract. Well, I told him that wasn't really a possibility, and he needed to pump the brakes a little bit and maybe talk to an attorney about all the implications that came with doing that. So he called the attorney. The attorney told him the exact same thing I did, which was, you don't want to go that route. The only option we had was to ask them if they would consider letting us out of the contract. And they said no. So we ended up moving forward with the sale. The seller moved out, but he was pretty bummed about the whole thing. In the end, his job offer did come through and he landed on his feet and he's happy again. So if you want to sell your house, just make sure you really want to sell your house before you sign that paperwork, because there's no going back. One thing worth noting is that in Colorado, I don't know how this is in every state, but here, if you go under contract with someone and the deal goes sideways, everyone agrees to go to mediation before they sue each other. That covers sellers, but what if you're a buyer and you change your mind? And I get this question literally all the time. And sellers really don't like hearing this. But in Colorado, it's very difficult for a buyer to lose their earnest money. As long as the buyer is within the terms of the agreement, they can terminate the agreement and get their earnest money back. Your loan gets denied. As long as that deadline hasn't passed, you can back out of the deal and get your money back. What if a buyer changes their mind at the last minute? Maybe they don't show up to closing, or maybe they back out of the deal a day or two before closing. All the deadlines have passed. Can the seller sue that buyer? Because they're going to want to. And the answer is no. And that's why earnest money is the amount that it is. You want to make sure it's high enough that if your deal doesn't go through, you have a little bit of money to offset the expenses that you're going to incur by being under contract with somebody who didn't deliver. The worst thing that can happen to a buyer is they lose their earnest money. No lawsuits. I've only had a buyer lose their earnest money one time, and it's so infrequent. I'll just go ahead and tell you the story so you know what it takes for a buyer to lose their earnest money and how hard it is for that to happen. I had a guy moving from New Mexico with his fiance, and he was in a coma. He was in a car wreck, ended up in a coma, and the house was more of a fixer-upper than a lot of the other houses we saw. And he was okay with that because he knew how to do the work, but she didn't. So when he was in a coma, we were set to close in just a few days. Our deadlines had all passed, and she didn't want to move forward with the sale until she knew what was happening with her fiance. So we asked for a little more time. We asked for a little more time, and the sellers were really gracious, gave us all the time we needed for her to decide that it didn't look like his situation was going to improve. She forfeited her earnest money, and the sellers put the house back on the market and ended up selling it to another buyer. That's how hard it is for a seller to keep the earnest money in a real estate deal in Colorado. The Colorado contract is long, and it has a ton of dates and deadlines. And as long as a certain deadline hasn't passed, the buyer can cancel based on that verbiage for that deadline, and they can get their earnest money back. Sometimes this leads to arguments between buyers and sellers who both feel entitled to the earnest money. And when that happens, that's more than I want to cover in this video. But if you'd like to hear about it, let me know in the comments, because that one does happen from time to time. The next Katy Perry real estate story played out over about a 5-year time frame, and it's wild. So the first takeaway from this story is that before you sell your house, you really want to make sure you have the right to sell your house, or you're going to have a bad time. And the second takeaway from this story is don't get involved in a real estate deal with Katy Perry, or she will sue you. Even if you're a group of nuns, you'll end up in a courtroom. And that's what happened in this story. Let's dig into it. So the Sisters of the Immaculate Heart of Mary out in Los Feliz, California, which is a suburb of LA, they pulled all their money together to buy a house. And this was back in the 70s. And I say house, but what I really mean is a mansion. This place had over 30,000 square feet, and the sisters decided to turn it into a convent. And for the sake of the video, I'll call it a house. Now, this house just happened to be next door to where the Manson family brutally murdered the LaBiancas back in 1969, just 3 years before the nuns bought the place. I want to be clear, the nuns' names were on the deed. They bought this house. In fact, there was a very wealthy benefactor who sold it to that order of nuns, gave them a discount, helped them buy it. But this was their home. Well, time goes by, and the nuns said that they kind of got backdoored by the Archdiocese of LA, and it had been approved by the Vatican. So ultimately, the Archdiocese tells these ladies, hey, you got to get out of the house. It's 2011. None of them are living there anymore, but they're still on the deed. So the Archdiocese says, hey, we're going to sell this house. And clearly there's a little bit of bad blood between the Archdiocese and the nuns. And they were pretty stressed over the whole thing. They were afraid that their house was being sold without their permission, and that the church was going to take all of the money. And these ladies were in their 70s and 80s, and were concerned about how they were going to be taken care of in the future by a church who had taken their house from them. Sometimes our seniors run into situations like this where I don't know. I can't say that the ladies were taken advantage of, but it just doesn't sound right to me. But it does happen all the time where a senior citizen has a family member or a loved one or a trusted advisor take advantage of them, whether it be a financial planner or somebody else. They'll put the property into a trust, and then maybe a trustee sells it, and this person's in their, golden years, and they don't have a place to live. So, these things happen. I don't take this stuff lightly. This is a fun video, and it's an interesting story, but watch out for your loved ones and make sure that everyone's doing right by them. Well, in 2011, the Archdiocese called these ladies in for a meeting and said, hey, we sold your house. And the ladies were pretty distraught. They'd not given any input. They hadn't given their permission. And they were rightfully concerned that the church had disregarded them. And they weren't going to see any money from the sale, which they hadn't sought money their whole lives. This wasn't their objective. But they really wanted to make sure that a church that they had served may not take care of them in the future, but this house would provide money to do that. So once the sellers found out it was Katy Perry who was buying the house and they learned who she was, they objected even more loudly than they did before.
Feud between pop star Katy Perry and a group of nuns trying to stop the singer from moving into their former convent.
They researched Katy Perry and they didn't like what they saw or heard. And it's not hard to understand why. I'm just imagining these old nuns Googling Katy Perry's name and their jaws dropping open when they see some of the pictures of this lady. They'd lived spiritual lives in this convent for decades, and now it was being sold to a woman who said this.
Because I swear I wanted to be like the Amy Grant of music, but it didn't work out, and so I sold my soul to the devil.
The Archbishop of LA didn't really care about these concerns. He told the ladies to pound sand. He's like, hey, I already got a buyer. The Vatican blessed it. I'm good to go. I can do whatever I want to do. And, obviously these ladies were pretty distraught over it. And them believing that since their name was on the deed, they had the right to sell the house, decided to go ahead and find another buyer. Enter Dana Hollister. Now, Hollister had already owned one former convent, and she gave these nuns $100,000 with the promise to pay more later, and she closed on the home quickly. She even hired security guards to keep out the Archbishop and Katy Perry. When she did this, she did it with the intent of keeping everybody away, and Katy Perry was there with her reps. The Archdiocese had people there, and the security guards told people to leave. The cops weren't sure what to do, so they told everybody to go home, and they'd have to sort it out in the courtroom. So immediately, Katy Perry and the Archdiocese sued Dana Hollister for interfering with the sale of the home, and they had a contract to prove it. So ultimately what happened with that was Dana Hollister and the nuns lost. Katy Perry was given the right to buy the property. A judge ruled that Hollister owed millions of dollars in damages. Let's fast forward to 2018. There are a lot of twists and turns with this lawsuit, and in the interest of time, I'll skip a lot of it. You can research it yourself. It's kind of a cool story. But Dana Hollister ends up filing bankruptcy because she just couldn't afford the judgment. And she was at a hearing to discuss additional damages or the structuring of the damages. And while she was there, the nuns always accompanied her to court. And one of those nuns passed over and hit the ground and died instantly in the courthouse. This led to one of the surviving sisters saying that Katy Perry has blood on her hands. My big takeaway here is that it's really easy to root for the nuns. Nuns against Katy Perry. Everyone loves an underdog, and no one ever roots for the gazillionaire real estate magnate, right? But the stories of the lawsuit don't really paint an accurate picture. And you really got to dig deep to realize that some of what the nuns did wasn't necessarily in their best interest. And Katy Perry didn't sue the nuns. She sued the other buyer. What Katy Perry did to the nuns was offend them greatly. Everything that they'd done their whole lives was the complete opposite of everything that Katy Perry stood for. And they were willing to fight with every bit of energy they had to even die in the courtroom to stop that from happening and to allow somebody else to buy the house. I'm not even sure if there's anyone in LA that has $15 million to buy that convent that would pass these nuns' moral standards. If there was, it certainly wasn't going to be Katy Perry. And for that, I commend somebody for fighting for what they believe in. If I had to pick a bad guy here, and I do, it's YouTube. I get to pick a bad guy. I would say it's the Archbishop of LA. Jose Gomez is the one who kind of pushed this whole thing through, and he really comes off looking bad. I mean, he chooses money over an order of nuns that had served their whole lives, and he really put them in a no-win situation, and that's unfortunate. You can take it to the next level and blame the Vatican if you want to. I'm sure some people will. I can't find anything about what happened with the house, the convent. Now, the church is probably still using it. They're probably going to sell it once maybe the last of the nuns dies. The contract with Katy Perry might have been extended or had a clause added to it that gives her the right to buy it when they do put it on the market. Whatever the case may be, it looks like it's still owned by the Archdiocese of LA. Now, Dana Hollister, on the other hand, was the one who tried to help the nuns, tried to help herself. She was looking to buy this convent and turn it into a boutique hotel. She'd already done it before. In fact, she took the boutique hotel that she owned, and in 2021, she listed it for sale for $40 million. And she ended up doing a reduction to just below $30 million, but the house didn't sell. If you made it this far and you haven't hit like or subscribe, I'll try harder to earn that next time. But if you did enjoy it, please give it a thumbs up. Maybe consider subscribing. If you have real estate questions, let me know. My contact information is down below. If you like this lawsuit kind of format, let me know and I'll make more of these videos. There are a ton of rich people suing each other over real estate, and I'd love to cover that for you. Thanks for watching and making it to the end. I appreciate it more than you know. Thank you so much. I'll catch you in the next video. Bye.